After the total failure of negotiations with Iran, Donald Trump gave the order to go to war with the Iranian regime until complete victory and until all U.S. conditions are met. I want everything. I don't want 90%. I don't want 95%. I want everything. I predict that Iran will come back to the negotiating table and give us everything we want. That's the bold statement Donald Trump made today when it became clear that the negotiations had completely failed. The United States Central Command has already sent warships to completely blockade Iran in the Strait area. And in fact, Trump announced a total blockade of the Hormuz Strait. The negotiations between the US and Iran ended without any agreement, even though they lasted 21 hours. Therefore, Donald Trump stated that military actions are resuming with renewed force. He even threatened, quote, to destroy Iran in one day. But you are probably wondering, what is the point of Donald Trump blocking the Strait of Hormuz if it is already blocked by the Iranians? We'll answer that interesting question and more in this episode. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, please subscribe to this channel and like this episode. Leave any comment you like. Subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechiy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in.
I could take out Iran in one day.
So now let's go through everything step by step. The negotiations between the US and Iran, which took place on Saturday, April 11 in Pakistan, ended unsuccessfully. Among the key disagreements are Iran's demands to maintain control over the Hormuz Strait and to refrain from transferring enriched uranium reserves. The deadlock threatens the two-week ceasefire reached last week and creates a risk of renewed and escalating hostilities. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who led the negotiations with the Iranians, stated that the parties held substantive discussions for 21 hours but were unable to overcome their differences. Here is a quote from J.D. Vance. For Iran, this is much worse news than for the U.S. We made our red lines very clear and they chose not to accept our terms. Washington is seeking a long-term firm commitment from Tehran not to pursue nuclear weapons or the means for their rapid development. We haven't seen that yet, but we hope we will. The American side has been flexible and accommodating enough and has negotiated in good faith. However, significant progress has not been achieved.
We've already spent 21 hours and we've had many substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's good news. The bad news is we haven't reached an agreement, and I think that's much worse news for Iran than it is for the United States of America. So we will return to the United States, and without an agreement, we have made it very clear what our red lines are, what we are willing to accept, and what we are not willing to accept.
Immediately after this statement by J.D. Vance, several Iranian media outlets claimed that the failure of the negotiations was due to the unrealistic position of the United States and their excessive demands. The delegations held several rounds of negotiations in various formats. And then J.D. Vance reported that the American group consulted with President Donald Trump many times. With Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bess, and the commander of U.S. Central Command, General Brad Cooper. And these negotiations went on for 21 hours straight. In the end, it became clear that Iran is absolutely confident that it can still fight, just like the US. What happened was obvious. Both sides had maximalist demands of each other, and they didn't listen to each other at all during the negotiations. It's impossible to reach an agreement with an opponent who is sure that he will either win or outlast his rival. And after the negotiations failed, Trump took action. First of all, Trump is absolutely confident in the victory of the United States. He stated, and I quote, "I want everything. I don't want 90%, I don't want 95%, I want everything. I predict that Iran will return to the negotiating table and give us absolutely everything we want. They have no trump cards." Later, Donald Trump announced the start of a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz by the US Navy. Next, get ready, there will be a long quote from Donald Trump. So, here's what we have. The meeting went well, most points were agreed upon, but on the only truly important issue, the nuclear one, there was no agreement. Immediately, the United States Navy, the best in the world, will begin the process of blockading all ships attempting to enter. At some point, we will move to the principle that everyone is allowed to enter, everyone is allowed to leave. But Iran does not allow this, simply stating, quote, "Somewhere out there might be a mine that no one but them knows about. This is global blackmail. I have also instructed our Navy to search for and intercept every vessel in international waters that has paid a fee to Iran. No one who pays an illegal fee will have safe passage on the open sea. We will also begin destroying the mines that the Iranians have placed in the strait. Any Iranian who opens fire on us or on civilian vessels will be eliminated. Iran knows better than anyone how to end this situation, which has already destroyed their country. Their navy is destroyed, their air force is destroyed, their air defense and radars are useless. Khamenei and most of their leaders are dead. All because of their nuclear ambitions. Now remember this about Khamenei. The blockade will begin soon. Other countries will also be involved in this blockade. Iran will not be allowed to profit from this illegal act of blackmail. They need money, and more importantly, they need nuclear weapons. Furthermore, at the right moment, we are fully prepared to act, and our armed forces will complete the destruction of what little remains of Iran." End of quote. That's why I told you to pay attention to what Donald Trump writes about Khomeini being dead. And by the way, that's the mistake that many commentators make when they say that the leader of Iran recently was Khomeini. Well, that's a big mistake, because actually the last leader was Khamenei, not Khomeini. Khomeini, Ruhollah Khomeini, died back in 1989. He was the first leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and after him it was Khamenei. So that's why it's very strange that the President of the United States confuses Khamenei with Khomeini and writes that Khomeini has already died. Well, actually, yes, he died back in 1989, but sorry, that's just a bit of a digression. It's important to note here that Chinese, Indian, and Pakistani ships were among the few that passed through the strait under the agreement with Tehran. This means that Trump's order to intercept could put the US on a path to conflict with those parties as well. By the way, on Fox News today, Trump was reminded that he had promised to impose 50% tariffs on all goods from any country that supplies military equipment to Iran. And so Trump stated, "Don't forget, this also applies to China." Quote, "Yes, this applies to everyone, including China. If we find out that China, because I hear reports in the news that China is supplying so-called man-pads missiles, I doubt they would do that, because we have certain relations, and I think they wouldn't act that way. Maybe at the very beginning of the war they supplied something little by little, but I don't think they will continue. But no, if we catch them doing this, they will get a 50% tariff, and that's just a colossal amount." Well, and of course, Donald Trump stated that the US is capable of completely destroying Iran in one day. Quote, "I could destroy Iran in one day. In an hour, I could take out all their energy infrastructure. All of them, every single power plant they have, and that's very serious. But I don't want to do that, because it would take Iran about 10 years to recover, and the country would never be able to fully recover. The US has already destroyed one Iranian bridge, just to show them what capabilities the American armed forces have." But here, I'm sure everyone has one main question. Donald Trump has announced a blockade of the Hormuz Strait. But why would the United States of America block the Hormuz Strait if it is already blocked by Iran? Plus, this would hit the Persian Gulf countries even harder. What's the idea behind such a blockade, and what would it actually achieve? That's very interesting. Let's discuss it right now. The point is that technically the Hormuz Strait is not closed. Iran is gradually allowing some tankers through in exchange for a fee of up to $2 million for each vessel. And what's especially important is that throughout the entire war, Iran has ensured unhindered access for its oil to and from the region. That is, Iran continued to trade oil. The point is that Iran created a situation in which only it could trade oil in this region, while the other Persian Gulf countries couldn't sell their oil. And then, as you know, Donald Trump lifted sanctions on Iranian oil right in the middle of the war. As a result, during the war, Iran increased its oil supplies by 100,000 barrels per day, reaching almost 2 million barrels a day. Therefore, by blocking the Armud Strait, Trump could have cut off a key source of funding for the government and military operations. This is a lever that the Trump administration has so far not dared to use. After all, blocking the strait even for Iranian oil could lead to a sharp rise in oil and gasoline prices worldwide. Because no matter what, Iranian oil was covering part of the global demand. That's exactly why the US Navy allowed Iranian tankers to pass through this region. And the Americans kind of turned a blind eye to the fact that Iran was not just continuing to trade, but actually increasing its oil trade during the war. I'll say it again, because Trump also lifted the sanctions on them. And any oil exported from the region right now can at least partially help contain the rise in oil prices. That was basically the calculation. The Trump administration, let me remind you, blocked the sale of Iranian oil since it withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal in 2018. Donald Trump's decision to lift sanctions on Iranian oil last month, once again in the midst of the war, released a significant amount of oil. That's 140 million barrels. Well, that's according to official data. And according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, that's enough to meet the entire world's oil demand for about 1.5 days. Well, let me emphasize again, that's all. But Trump's decision had the opposite effect. The lifting of sanctions allowed Iran to sell its oil, which had previously been under sanctions, to finance the war against whom? The United States of America and their allies. And Iran made significant profits from these sales, selling oil at a premium of several dollars above the price of Brent crude. Yes, that's what war is like. So Trump starts the war, a crisis with oil is created, and to at least partially solve this crisis, what does he do? He lifts sanctions on his adversary, something that wasn't done even before the war. Besides, as you remember, Trump was so desperate to save the oil market situation that he even lifted sanctions on Russian oil. And here comes a very dangerous moment. The thing is, the temporary lifting of sanctions against Russian oil expired on April 11, as you all know. But up to this moment, up to the time of recording this episode, the United States Department of the Treasury still hasn't announced whether they are extending the lifting of sanctions on Russian oil or not. Because Trump previously mentioned that, in principle, they wouldn't reimpose the sanctions. He says we lifted sanctions on Russian oil at sea and probably won't reinstate them. There are currently no updates on the website of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. But what is known from insider information is that Donald Trump and the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, agreed to extend the lifting of sanctions back on April 9. The Trump administration very often makes such decisions not through loud presidential announcements, but through technical updates of general licenses on the website of the U.S. Department of the Treasury, quietly. This allows them to avoid unnecessary criticism of aiding the Kremlin. And usually, only after a few days do journalists find out whether something was extended or not. And let's not forget that such licenses are renewed on business days, and today is Sunday, plus it's Easter for the Orthodox, so most likely this license will be extended on Monday. And most importantly, traders and major importers, for example in India, continue their operations to purchase Russian oil, being confident that the green light from Washington has been given and it isn't going away anytime soon. Well, in a situation where Trump is going to block Iranian oil supplies, he will definitely extend the lifting of sanctions against Russia, just to hold back the price increase at least a little. And today, April 12, Trump assured that as soon as the war ends, gasoline prices will quickly return to pre-war levels. That's what he said, just like that. That's a lie. I won't go into detail, but economists will say that's not how it works. Unfortunately, even when the war is over, when the Strait of Hormuz is unblocked and so on, there will still be a rather long period of recovery. But by blocking the Strait of Hormuz, Trump risks driving oil and gas prices even higher in order to maximize pressure on Iran and achieve an end to the war. And here I want to recommend that you definitely watch my episode from yesterday, where I immediately said that the negotiations between the US and Iran in Pakistan are just a cover for an even larger military operation, which is now unfolding. And right now, Trump is assuring that the United States and other countries will send minesweepers to the Strait of Hormuz to clear areas mined by Iran. Quote, We have minesweepers there. Right now we have high-tech underwater minesweepers, the most modern and the best, but we are also purchasing more traditional minesweepers. And as far as I understand, the United Kingdom and several other European countries are sending minesweepers there as well. Well, in addition, Trump assures that now the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and so on, are, you could say, much closer. And now they are simply forced to join the war because it's in their interest to unblock the strait. Quote, "Oh yes, the Gulf states, you could say, are much closer now, so they might have to do it. But, they could have stayed out of it, but Iran made a mistake and started firing missiles at them." That's an interesting hint that most likely there are negotiations going on for the Emirates or Saudi Arabia to actually join the war against Iran, at least to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. But what's also important is that at the time of recording this episode, according to Vortex, a company that tracks ships, only 2 empty tankers heading to the Strait of Hormuz have turned around. After it became known on Sunday that the negotiations between the US and Iran ended without reaching a long-term peace agreement, which tells us that for now, the Strait of Hormuz is still under control. But let's see what Donald Trump will do. Because, for example, the Democrats in the United States right now, frankly speaking, don't understand the strategy. What's the logic? What's the idea? So, what's next? Well, okay, the US really can block the Hormuz Strait for everyone pretty quickly. Iran won't be able to trade. But who knows how much resilience Iran has? And how do you open the strait? Because now, essentially, there are 2 sides, and both are blocking the strait. And how do you open it? That question remains open, so I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially with any donation or paid subscription using the links and details in the description of this video or by scanning the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.